Hello and welcome back to another episode of the RevRx podcast, where we show you how to thrive in faith, family, and health. My name is Chad Potts, and I'm your host. Today, I'm so excited for you to meet our special guest, Brett Rezewski. Brett's an author, he's a caregiver, he's a rock-solid guy. But here's the thing, you're going to hear his tragic story about how his life changed in a moment when his wife had a massive stroke. She was pregnant with their fourth child, and how life has been so different ever since. You see, in the midst of this, they had to make a lot of really tough decisions. Decisions that a lot of us hope we never have to make. But they made those decisions with the best that they had. And here's the thing, despite the tragedy of this story, despite everything that took place, we see the grace of God in every step of the way. You're going to love hearing about his 9-year-old son who stepped up to play hero on that day. You're going to love hearing about the different stories that he tells about how God's hand was present in every single detail of what happened. And you're going to love this conversation about the goodness of God in both the mountaintops and the valleys. You see, God doesn't just meet us after the storm. God is with us in the midst of the storm. And we're going to talk about that and more today. So without further ado, I introduce to you my friend, Brett Rezewski. Brett, brother, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. What a privilege it is to have you here with us.
Thank you so much, Chad. I really appreciate being on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear your story. I'm excited to hear what God's doing in your life. But before we get into some of that, I'd just really love to hear, who's Brett? Can you help us get to know you a little bit better?
Yeah, well, right now I live in Beaverton, Oregon. I'm born and raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan. After high school, I enlisted in the Air Force, and I was on active duty for 8 years, stationed at Fairchild Air Force Base in Spokane.
Okay.
So that's what pulled me over to the Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
After the Air Force, I went to school to become an X-ray tech, where I worked at the VA for 9 years. Cool. And then I went to school to do something from home at medical billing and coding, which I never got a chance to do that. I'm actually a stay-home. I take care of my wife right now. Mm-hmm. I'm a full-time caregiver, and I'll go into why. And one thing, she had a stroke, so I'm not sure if we can get right into that story.
Yeah, man, let's go.
Okay. All right. Well, you know how people, when they get married, they say the vows, for richer, for poor, until death do us part, for sickness and in health, right?
Yep.
Well, we had to do that. We had to basically fulfill our wedding vows really early. When she was 35, she had a massive stroke. On June 10th, 2017, it was caused by a disease called Moyamoya disease. And to break it down a little bit, Moyamoya disease is a disease that she was born with, but it had been missed her whole life. She had been complaining of headaches. And what it is a narrowing of the arteries at the base of the brain, which causes superficial arteries to be created. And those superficial arteries basically blew. She was actually 6 weeks pregnant. And when I was at work, it was on a Saturday afternoon. I was at work. I have 3 boys. At the time, they were 9, 5, and 2. And when she was 6 weeks pregnant, she just felt really nauseous. She actually told me afterward that she felt like her brain had exploded. So it prompted her to go lay down on the bed in her room, and she started to dial 911, but she couldn't. For some reason, there was a notification that kept on popping up. We're thinking that was an update on her phone that wasn't allowing her to be able to get through 911. So she faintly called out for my son Connor, who was 9 at the time. He came in and saw that Michelle was trying to dial 911 and wasn't able to. And then she went into a seizure. So Connor saw her have a full-blown seizure. And what I learned yesterday, this was really, really neat. I learned yesterday that at 9 years old, my son Connor had peace at that moment. Wow. He had peace about seeing his mom have a seizure. I'm not sure if you've ever seen anyone have a seizure. It's scary.
It's scary. Yeah.
I saw Michelle have another seizure a few months after that, and it was terrifying for me. And for Connor, he describes how he had peace in that time. And I'm just like, that just blew my mind that somebody so young and so calm, he dialed 911, he saved your life.
Wow.
And he was actually nominated for the Red Cross Hero Award,
Cool.
but he didn't get it, unfortunately. But to his credit, he's like, that wasn't me acting. That was God working through me to help me, to give me the strength that I needed. So even now, he's now 17. He pushed back and he said, it wasn't me. It was the Holy Spirit leading me and giving me peace in order to save my mom.
That's incredible. Wow.
And so, went to the hospital. It was actually, he goes on to talk about how our son, Shannon, who she doesn't live near us. She did not live near us at the time at all. Now she lives out of state, but she just happened to be at the right place at the right time where they saw an ambulance in the fire truck go down a street not even leading to our home. Wasn't even close. I think they had to make about 4 or 5 turns in order to get to our house, but she had to nudge to follow. And she followed the fire truck or ambulance or whatever right to our house. And while going along every turn, she's like, okay, don't turn there, because she knew that the closer that one more turn led to our house, and to her fear, stepped right in front of our house. And I was trying to piece things together afterward. At the time, our 2-year-old, our youngest was 2, so our kids were 9, 5, and 2, and our youngest was 2, and he was banging on the window. I heard this from our neighbor across the street. And our neighbor, he was going to come over and see what was going on, because he's like, Hayden was just like pounding on the window. Like he knew something was happening.
Yeah.
And then shortly after he saw him, then the ambulance came, the fire trucks came, and then he's like, oh my gosh, something is happening.
Yeah.
And so the paramedics came, and so did Shannon. Shannon came in. Shannon was a good friend, so she was able to stay with the kids while I would go right from work to the hospital. And it was on the bed where they intubated my wife, which saved her. Got her to the hospital where I met her. So she had a tube down her throat and just lines everywhere. And I remember going into the hospital, going into the ER waiting room, and I just said, Michelle, you got to fight for us, and she did. But
and
that was
nothing prior to this, right? I mean, there no.
She had headaches.
Yeah.
Her entire life.
They had no idea about Moyamoya.
No
or
idea
like
about
that.
Moyamoya disease. Yeah. It was undiagnosed.
Wow.
And what's really hard about that story is 2 months prior to her having the stroke, she went into the doctor, and the doctor said, or in her note after the appointment, here, we actually wrote a book about our story. You can get this on Amazon. It's called Hope Undeferred, Finding the Light While in the Tunnel. And I need to find, so there was a part, sorry. Well, she said in the doctor note, it said, well localized, mid-right, deep pain stops her in her tracks and it reoccurs. So Michelle she did really good job of explaining how the headaches were affecting her.
Yeah.
And at that appointment, she was given an antidepressant and saying that she was a stressed out mom with 3 kids. Also, to keep in mind that her mom or her grandma, who was 100% Japanese, when she was 50 years old, she had what we thought was a brain aneurysm, which killed her. No autopsy was done, but now that we're thinking after Michelle had Moyamoya disease, and we know that it's hereditary.
Yeah.
It's a rare disease, but it's more predominant in Asian women.
Wow.
And Michelle's grandma was 100% Japanese, leaving Michelle a quarter Japanese. And every time Michelle would go into the doctor appointment, she would tell the doctors that my grandma died of a brain aneurysm. So we had a family history of something happening, but it was missed. And if the Moyamoya disease had been caught, then a corrective surgery could have been done to prevent the stroke from happening.
Yeah.
So, and now she's left paralyzed on the left side. So the stroke was so bad. It was a hemorrhagic stroke where she had 200 milliliters of blood pool on the right side of her brain, pushing the midline of her brainstem over about an inch to the left, pitching off her brainstem, which that was the doctors they told us, doctors sometimes speak over you and tell you what is going to happen now. Well, the doctors told us that one, they said that the likelihood of Michelle's survival was grim. Like that's what the doctors kept on saying over and over, that it was grim, like she's not going to survive. And then the first 24, 48 hours were crucial.
Yeah.
So once she made it that far, then the doctors were like, okay, well, now that she made it this far, chances are she's going to be a vegetable for her whole life. Well, that didn't happen. And then the doctor said, well, now that she's aware, because of the brain bleed was so bad, it pinched off her brainstem, which she's not going to be able to swallow her whole life because the signal for swallowing starts in the brainstem. Well, she doesn't have any food restrictions. She can eat. She can drink. No restrictions at all. So awesome. God opened that up to her.
Yeah.
So there was just like miracle after miracle that happened to kind of get us to where we are.
Yeah. Well, and that story brings up a lot of different places we could jump off from, but the big thing that's glaring for me is the fact that, okay, you're a, normal family, going about your lives, you're at work. This terrible thing happens.
Yeah.
And it completely transforms the trajectory of your life moving forward.
In many ways.
But I've heard so many times how God's working anyway, and how God has worked in that time after time again. There's this tendency today to think that, if God's really out there, or if God's really good, then he won't let bad things happen to us, right? And that's not biblical.
No, it's not.
And B, that's just not true.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about, okay, something tragic happened, but yet I still see God at work in the midst of it?
Yeah. So right away, I remember when Michelle was at ICU. So she was in the hospital altogether for about 5 months in the different hospitals and inpatient rehab facilities and skilled nursing homes. And while she was in ICU for the first 2 weeks, I just remembered I was on the elevator heading home after having been in the hospital all day. And I just remember that I said, God, I don't want this to go waste. I don't want any suffering to be wasted.
Yeah.
And it was through first, I want to say that if any of your listeners are not plugged into some kind of church or some kind of community, get involved now, start building, because it was that church community that pulled together. So 25 people in my church gathered when Michelle was waiting. We were all waiting for her to be done with the brain surgery. And then that started a chain of events that was just amazing. So my in-laws at the time, they were living in Spokane, Washington. After the stroke, they sold their house and they were actually living with us. They lived with us for 6 years to take care of Michelle while I worked full time. The church built an addition onto our home.
Wow.
So that so that her parents could live here to take care of Michelle. And not only that, but they had for 2 years, they brought meals to our house at least 2 days a week. And we're not talking about slim pickings. We're talking about leftovers. We could eat the whole week, including 2 years of Thanksgiving with all of the fixings. So,
wow.
There's a verse in the Bible that said that God has prepared good works in order so that you may walk in them.
Yep.
And that was a constant theme throughout everything that people were doing for us. Their belief was that this was already prepared for them to do for us.
Wow.
And so for one thing, that's giving the church a testimony.
Yeah. Well, it's the church. It's the church being the church. It's the church being the body of Christ.
The church doing what it should be doing.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of people that might be listening to this that have that church hurt, and it is sad that there are churches out there that don't demonstrate the body of Christ the way they should. But that doesn't mean that's like how it is.
Yeah.
You just have to find the right community, the right people. And we found that.
That's so important, because I think a lot of times our experience with church maybe hasn't been that great.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that becomes the representation of Big C Church,
Right.
of the entire church,
Yeah.
based on that interaction. But what I'm hearing you say, and what I want to reiterate right here for just a minute, is that, hey, if you haven't found your group yet, then that doesn't mean they're not out there. That doesn't mean that there's not a tribe out there. There's enough churches out there that are doing the right thing and being the hands and feet of Jesus to people in need and taking care of their own. And they would love to have you be a part. So, I hear a lot of believers that say, I don't need church. I just, I read my Bible and I watch stuff on TV. And, to which I would say, that's just not the same. You're missing it, right?
Actually being obedient to being plugged into a group of believers, because, it's like when you're a part, like everybody has events that they go to for their businesses and things. Why do we have events?
Yeah.
We have events so we can be around the fire, right?
Yeah.
So when you start stepping away from the fire, you start cooling off, right?
Yep.
So when you're gathered around the body of believers, you're staying close to the fire. You're being grounded, and that's allowing you, equipping you in order to do the good works that God has prepared beforehand for you to do.
Yeah, and we're not perfect. We're all we're all human, right?
Right.
At least most of us are. We're all human, but the thing is, we all are following a good God, and if you're around a bunch of people that are just gathering around and following after Him the best they can, everybody's at different stages, everybody's at different maturity levels, everybody's at a different point in their walk. But you know what? He's the common denominator. And if He's the common denominator and people are really pursuing Him, then you're in the right place. And I love to hear stories like that about how the church was the church, the church that it was meant to be. That's encouraging.
So I want to go back to answer more of your question about what God has done in us. So I want to talk about the baby for a minute. So Michelle was 6 weeks pregnant, and because the baby wasn't viable, the doctors again were saying that if we don't decide about the pregnancy, that meaning end it, there's a chance that Michelle could die. And they said, well, because Michelle, everything was stacked against her with the life, because Michelle she had a history of a stroke. She has Moyamoya disease. She was pregnant with those three things.
Right.
There was a high chance that she could have another stroke and die.
Right.
And, I'm a firm believer of pro-life and the sanctity of life. And I was, praying about this and talking to my pastors. And one pastor told me, his name was Tom. He told me that God the Father allowed His Son to die so that you will live. And what that meant to me was that, okay, well, I need to let my child die so that my wife would live, so that my boys would have mom growing up, because if something did happen to Michelle where there's a high chance that they both would die. And then we'd be left without mom, without my wife.
Right.
And so another guy that I talked to, he said that he allowed the stroke to be so bad, her injury to be so bad, that God pretty much made the decision for me. But here's what that did for us. We are able to talk to and connect to so many different kinds of people.
Yeah.
I'm a spouse caregiver, which there aren't that many, but there are some. There are some that are my age that are taking care of their spouses.
Right.
I can connect with those people. My wife can connect with people who have had strokes. We can connect with people that have had, abortions, because that's what we had. We can, like, all of these different things, but we've chosen to flip it on its head.
Yeah.
And rather stay in the pain. We're using that pain, we have a book, we're using that pain to turn into, I know it sounds cliche, but your pain to purpose.
Yeah. Right.
But I feel like it's given us another trajectory in order to connect with other people and to help them.
I'm a big believer, and I say this a lot on the podcast. I'm a big believer that the things that we go through and the things that God delivers us from and the things that God delivers us through, maybe that's a better way to say it,
Hmm.
um, is those things are meant for us to then turn around and help other people through.
Yeah.
Because there's something to be said for empathy. And I'm gonna take I'm gonna talk about the baby.
Hmm.
A lot of people are very quick to say, I know what I would do in that situation. But Brett, I'm gonna assume your thought process for a minute. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that probably nobody really knows what they're going to do in that situation until they are faced with that possibility. Would you say
Yeah.
that's pretty accurate?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And a lot of times we're just we don't understand all of the complexity of some of these situations until we go through them. And so for somebody dealing with a situation like that, well, Brett, you're the perfect person to go to them
Hmm.
and to tell them, not to tell them what to do, but to tell them how you've dealt with it and to tell them, the emotions that you have felt, the support that you have felt, and the different things that you've learned.
Hmm.
And that applies to every aspect of this journey, doesn't it? You'd mentioned that your son he was describing some of that piece,
Yeah.
and you'd mentioned to me beforehand that it was part of a speech. Was that part of that speech? And then
No, not that
okay,
part. But what he was saying is that suffering, this is really paradoxical
hmm
for people to understand, but he was saying that suffering is actually good for you. And then he was explaining to himself, because in the Bible it says, suffering leads to perseverance, and perseverance, hope, and
yep,
hope does not disappoint,
yeah,
right? So he framed his thoughts basically that when we go through suffering, it's God's way of growing us,
yeah,
if you let it.
yeah, yeah,
There's so many points, there's so many times where people push back and they
mm,
blame God. And they say, if God were good, then why would he allow this to happen to me?
right, right,
The opposite is actually true. Since God is good, he allows it to happen to you so that you can become closer to him.
yeah,
Most of the time where we've gone through pain in our life, God, that's when we've grown closest to the Lord.
yep,
Before all of this, back in 2009, we had another miscarriage. Jacob was, Michelle was 20 weeks pregnant with Jacob when
mm,
his heart stopped.
mm,
I was finishing my, I was in the Air Force at the time, and yeah, his heart stopped. Michelle had to deliver him in the hospital,
mm,
regularly, epidural, the whole nine.
yeah,
And then we held Jacob in the palm of our hand, like he fit, and we held on to him. And that was really a crucial time in my walk with the Lord.
mm,
But I'm reading through the book of Judges right now,
mm,
and in the Judges, you see the Israelites, they go up and down with their faith, right?
yep,
They realize that they're crying out to God. God sends the rescuer and he's, and they're good. Oh, and then that's like how I was.
yeah, yeah,
So I feel like when I start drifting away, it's when like I need that correction.
mm,
But, yeah, I feel like that's, I knew right after Michelle had a stroke that I needed to do something different.
mm,
I needed to make a decision, not only for me, but for my family.
yeah,
Because I realized that if I had let bitterness, and blame God and that whole nine, then chances are that my boys would have that same perspective,
wow,
and that they might not even trust the Lord later on. But I believe that through God giving me the strength to make that decision, my son was able to
mm,
make that speech in his class.
that's cool.
Isn't it? I was like, whoa, I was just blown away. Like, as I was watching it, I was like, he gets it.
Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
gets it. It's so
17
cool.
and he gets it.
Yeah.
And there's a ripple effect to all of our decisions, particularly those decisions about faith.
Hmm.
Rarely do we make decisions and they're in a vacuum, right? It's going to affect other people. So I love that. Like your decision to let
Hmm.
God turn this into something to grow you rather than just be angry with God for it happening,
Yeah.
impacted generations to come. We have no idea what impact that may have down the road to his kids and his kids,
Hmm.
And so I think that's awesome. And then thinking about the truth behind that, yeah, suffering isn't pleasant. And, I think a lot of us spend our lives trying to avoid it, if we're honest. Nobody's like, suffering, sign me up for that. Right?
Hmm.
It's one of those things that we don't appreciate until sometimes when we're going through it, or a lot of times looking back.
Hmm.
And, we don't grow in our comfort zones. We
Right.
grow whenever we can't. And here's something God's been teaching me lately too, is that, as long as I'm in control and as long as I can
Hmm.
control everything, as long as I'm comfortable, then I feel like that's what I'm after. But you know
Hmm.
what? I don't have to rely on God during those times. It's in those moments where I lose control and I realize just how helpless I am.
Hmm.
And I realize that, I'm not in control of any of this stuff. I realize my need for the Lord. And,
Yeah,
uh,
amen.
and so, suffering can bring about great growth in our spiritual lives. And you said it right, if we let it.
If you let it.
You had a
Yeah.
decision. You had a decision. All right, am I going to let this take me this way, or let me take it this way? And at the time, maybe you weren't thinking about uh, your son giving a speech when he was 17, but you knew enough to think my decision is going to impact them one way or another.
Yeah.
And so I love that you were able to think outside of yourself, and I think God gives us that ability because I think we're born with this nature that wants to think about me, myself, and I. This inward bent on ourselves, if you will. Um,
Hmm.
but God gives us that ability through His Spirit to be able to say, it's not all about me. Let me look and see what else this may affect. And so, man, I'm excited to see your kids grow up and to see and realizing at that age of 9 that the presence of God was in him and that
Yeah.
the peace of God was in him.
When I heard him say that, like I mean, most adults, they would freak out.
Right. Right.
Like I often go back, or I try to think about what would I have done if I were there.
Yeah.
And here's my thinking. So knowing what I was done, knowing what I did prior to the stroke, because here, the night that Michelle had her stroke, we had a fight.
Mm.
We were arguing, and she had told me that she's never felt that anxious before.
Mm.
For that day, did deal with anxiety, but she told me before I left that I have never felt this anxious before.
Mm.
Is what she told me.
Wow.
And then I prayed with her, I think, and I said, "I'm sorry, Michelle. I gotta go to work. I was running late." So I remember praying with her, and I kissed her on the forehead. Then I walked out of the door. And the next time I saw her is when
Mm.
after she had her stroke. So, but before then, what I would have done if I were home and she were stressed, I would probably have taken the kids away from the house so that Michelle could have some quiet time.
Mm.
And then if I had done that, I might have come home to my wife.
Right. Right.
So God was allowing me to be gone
Yeah.
for everything had to happen exactly the way it did in order
Yeah.
for us to wind up here we are now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's maybe a different path than you would have chosen to walk,
Hmm. Yeah.
but it's one that's glorifying God every step of the way. And I appreciate that about you. Some of the I guess some of the things that are important to you right now are telling your story
Hmm.
and providing people hope when they go through dark times, finding the light in the tunnel. I like that.
Hmm.
But then it's also raising awareness about Moyamoya. So can you tell us a little bit
Yes.
about that and how we can
Yeah.
kind of make people more aware of that condition and maybe make it to where someone else has it picked up a little sooner?
Okay. So, it started with headaches, and headaches are really tough for doctors to
Yeah.
diagnose. I mean, they could be anything. They could be migraine. It could be stress.
Yeah.
But one thing that I want to say is that, after having complained to so many doctors over and over again and being told that it's nothing, we kind of gave up.
Yeah.
Because when you do a complaining and find out that maybe it's something that I have to live with,
Mm-hmm.
we stopped.
Yeah.
And what we learned afterward is that if Michelle had an MRA
Mm-hmm.
of the brain, so it's an MRI with contrast.
Yeah.
So if she would have had an MRA, it would have picked up the Moyamoya.
Yeah.
And then
That picks up
there's
on the vessels. So
that picks up, right?
yeah.
And then she could have had a surgery to
Mm-hmm.
correct it to prevent the stroke
Yeah.
from
Well,
happening.
and that's big. In healthcare myself, I understand how much you've got to advocate for yourself because
Yeah,
the system is it is what it is. And we have thoughts, but that's a different conversation for a different day. But it's a system where you go in to see your doctor and they've got 20 minutes to see you. And
right.
they're assessing some things, and you're right, like headache is such a non-general symptom. It could be anything, and especially with a woman. It could be cycle related, just a lot of different things to.
Hmm.
But here's the thing: if you're getting a gut feeling that maybe there's something more than what I'm getting, if they're telling me, oh, it's fine, it's normal, but you just aren't okay with that, it's okay to push back.
It's okay.
It's okay to advocate for yourself, and it's okay to find second opinions, third opinions, whatever you need. Because I hear stories like this a lot, to where we go and we think, okay, well, apparently I'm fine, or apparently I've just got to live with this. But that's one person's medical opinion.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean that's the gospel truth.
Right.
And so trust that intuition in yourself too, because a lot of times that might be the Holy Spirit moving in you to kind of prompt you. Maybe I need to push further. And a lot of people feel like that when we go to the doctor, that they're the expert and we know nothing.
Hmm.
And so I've got to do whatever they say, and whatever they say is right. Well, there's a reason they call it practicing medicine, because it's not as cut and dry as you think.
That's true.
It
Yeah.
is kind of an art. And people are different. Everyone's different. Everyone has a different makeup. Everyone has different symptoms. And so, that's one person's medical opinion, but that doesn't make it the only medical opinion out there. And
Hmm.
so, I love that, encouraging people to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
Thinking about family history too is important, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
With her grandmother having this issue, and of course, no definitive way to know, but yeah, I mean, that's important to make sure that we're thinking back and like, all right, a lot of these things are hereditary.
Yeah, and we got our kids screened. So
Oh,
I pushed for MRAs for all three of them, and they're clear.
good.
So we're thankful for that. But yeah, if the doctors had, I was actually digging through her medical records after the stroke just to
Hmm.
see if there's something that could have been done, something that was missed. And when I read that doctor's note, like I told you about, and
Yeah,
the stroke was on the right side of her brain, deep
very specific.
mid, exactly, very specific. The doctor didn't even describe where it was happening.
Yeah.
And also another thing that happened with Michelle after that, she was having fainting episodes.
Mm,
So much so where the doctor ordered her to wear a Holter monitor to check her heart,
gotcha.
which came back normal.
Yeah, that wouldn't have showed up. Yeah.
So what it was, we're thinking, is that because so the Moyamoya, while the arteries are constricted, it was preventing blood and oxygen to get to the brain. And actually, our good friend Vince Murdoch, I'm not sure if you know, he's a UFC fighter,
Okay. Yeah.
and he was actually right before one of his fights, he had to get screened just to make sure he was clear to fight, and they found Moyamoya in him.
Hmm.
So much so that he had 100% blockage on
Wow.
one side of his brain. And some symptoms, I was talking with him the other day, he said some symptoms for him where he just felt like he knows his body really well because
Yeah.
he's such like a hard athlete,
Yeah.
but he started getting really tired
Hmm.
and started getting more fatigued. And that was like something that, but again, he was just thinking that it was something else. Then he found out that it was Moy Moy, and he was fortunate enough to have the surgery before something happened.
Yeah.
But Michelle was fainting; she was having these headaches, so there were like all these red flags.
Mhm.
But
Well, and it's you can't go back and change it.
right,
But what you can do is raise awareness,
yeah,
make
exactly.
people aware of this rare disease, and tell people to advocate for themselves, because you know what, you might save somebody
Hmm.
from having to go through, or from death, or from having to go through some of the things that you've gone through. But I'm going to ask you something, and
Go for it.
take it or leave
Okay.
it. Would you change anything?
That is a really hard question. Yes and no.
Yeah.
Yes, because um, I see how I was back then. My wife would come to me about how burdened she was, like with the three kids, with doing everything, with managing the finances, the grocery shopping, doing all of the things. That she would come to me over and over and over again, and I wouldn't do much to take things off her plate.
Mm.
And it wasn't until afterward where I had no choice.
Mm.
The term is sink or swim.
Yeah.
Well, we sunk for a while.
Yeah.
Now I feel like we're treading water, and we're doing our best to stay afloat. But it made me realize what I was actually doing. And now I look, for example, when you see a couple at a grocery store, who is usually the one leading the way?
Hmm.
Wife.
Yep.
And then when I'm looking, I'm like, that was me. I was the passive one,
Yeah.
letting her do all of it.
Yeah.
And then, and even one of my friends, he doesn't really manage the calendar. That's his wife's
Mm.
job. That was my wife's job.
Yeah.
My wife did all the planning. She did the calendar. She did the packing for the trips.
Yeah.
I have to do it.
Mm.
And it's caused me to grow and to become a better leader.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I would change it to have, so that she would have all of her faculties and she'd be able to walk. But no, because it's helped me grow and to become the person that God created me to be.
Mm. Yeah.
So it's, yeah, two sides to the same coin.
I love that. That's a fantastic answer. And I've never asked that before on a podcast, so I appreciate you. I appreciate
Yeah.
you being honest and just really opening up to us today, because what we're trying to say is that, what, life's not life doesn't go the way that we want it to a lot of
Hmm.
times, and we're not in control of that as much as we like to think we are. We don't have control of that. What we do have control of is how we respond.
How we respond, exactly.
Yeah. And brother, your faith through it all is inspiring. And I appreciate you sharing that with my listeners today. Even when life takes a turn, and even when life looks different than you would have ever dreamed,
Mm.
God is still
There's
good, and
one.
God is still with you.
There's one point that I want to make. So, in the Bible can be misinterpreted a lot. So one verse that can be misinterpreted is 1 Corinthians 10:13, which says, "No temptation has overtaken you except which is common to man, but God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation, he will give you a way of escape so that you can endure it."
Mhm.
And a lot of people look at that verse and say, well, that means that God won't allow me to go through anything more than I can handle,
Yep. And we hear that a
right?
lot, don't we? God won't give you more than you
And
can handle.
but if God would not allow you to go through anything more than you can handle, then what's the point of having him if you can handle everything on your own, right? But if
That's
and
powerful.
when and Paul in Corinthians, he talks about being like near death, like wanting, like, because he's been shipwrecked, he's been taken prisoner to the point of wanting to die.
Right.
Like he's suffering that much. And then he says that because my weakness is like his strength is proven in my weakness. I'm
Hmm.
not saying it correctly, but the point is like God's power is made aware by our weakness, by our struggle.
Yeah.
so that we can point him and say it's not us, so that there's no boasting in us, but it's power of God in us that helps us to get through those times.
Yeah. Yeah. I love every bit of that. That's extremely, extremely powerful. And I see that in your son, who says it wasn't me.
Yeah, I know.
It wasn't
right?
me. It was him. So yeah, it's a lie. God won't give you more than you can handle. Yes, he will.
You will.
Otherwise, what's the point, right? Why do we
Mhm.
need him if we can handle it all? But here's the thing. We don't realize a lot of times how much we need him until we've got to have him.
Yeah.
And then when we rely solely on him, he comes through every time. And it doesn't mean he changes our circumstances. I want to make that
Right.
clear too.
Yeah.
Sometimes he does deliver us from our circumstances. A lot of times he delivers us through our circumstances.
Sometimes
And
he makes you find the light while in the tunnel.
amen. Amen.
That's why I wrote this book, because some people, they don't see that trial ending and
Yep.
they feel like there's no light,
Yep.
there's no hope, but there is, and the hope is Jesus while you're going into that tunnel. So
Man, so good. Well, Brett, tell us where we can find your book. If anybody out here wants to get in contact with you, if they're moved by your story or encouraged by your story, how can they reach you? How can they get into your world?
so I have a website for my book. It's at hopeundeferred.com.
Yep.
But I've also started something called the Faithful Man's Journey,
Hmm.
because while I've been, talking with a lot of people, especially as an X-ray tech, when I was working there, I talked to a lot of people, and some people, their husbands left after their wives had a stroke or some sort of illness, and that happens a lot.
Yeah.
So they decide to go the wrong way at the fork in the road. So I created the Faithful Man's Journey. There's a document, and I have a 6-day challenge
Hmm.
leading to a men's Bible study that happens on Friday mornings at 8 a.m. Pacific.
Awesome.
So I've kind of so if people are like struggling to find their own community, I have one for them that I can plug into. So
Very
people
nice.
can go to faithfulmansjourney.com and then get the playbook that I've created, which will help them lead towards get on discovery call with me. And then they can get plugged into that men's call where we really, help men sharpen each other.
Yeah. As iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Brett. I'm going to put all those links in the show notes, but
Cool.
keep doing great things, man. You're doing tremendous work for the kingdom, and your story is encouraging. And I just wish nothing but blessings on you and your family. And man, if I can help you guys at all, you reach out.
Thanks,
But you
Chad.
guys check out Brett, the work he's doing. Pick up his book. It's going to be a great source of encouragement for you. And man, just keep being great for the kingdom.
All right. Appreciate it, brother.
Thank you for listening to the RevRx podcast. We hope you enjoyed what you heard today, and if so, we'd love it if you would hit that subscribe button so that you'll never miss a new episode from us. Also, feel free to leave us reviews and comments, as we'd love to hear from you. Be blessed and be the very best you.